Omega knelt before the Alpha King waiting to die. He placed his crown on her head instead. Dark clouds hung low, hiding the sun and casting the castle in shadows that seemed almost alive. Within the highest tower of Eldrath's palace, a single figure knelt upon cold stone, chains biting into her wrists. Her name was Lyra. She had come to this place as a fugitive, hunted by fate itself, and now she awaited the end of her life. Before her stood Kale, the Alpha King, the ruler whose name was whispered in fear across every village and forest in the land. His presence was commanding, a mixture of quiet power and unyielding authority. Black robes trimmed with silver caught the dim light of the torches, and a crown of dark iron rested upon his head, symbolizing the dominion he held over both men and magic. Lyra's knees ached, her back stiffened from hours of waiting, but her gaze remained steady on him. She had lived a life of exile, moving through the shadows, surviving on scraps and whispered secrets. Yet here before this king, she felt the weight of mortality more keenly than ever. She was an Omega, weak in the eyes of some, yet strong in ways even she did not fully understand. And she had learned long ago that fear alone could not break her spirit. Kale circled her slowly, the sound of his boots echoing in the stone chamber. "You are quiet," he said, his voice calm but cold. "Most who kneel before me scream, beg, or curse me. You simply wait." Lyra lifted her chin. "There is nothing left to say. I have come to terms with what will happen." Kale paused, studying her face. Her hair was dark as midnight, tangled and falling around her shoulders. Her eyes, however, were sharp, bright with defiance. He had seen many who claimed courage, but hers was different, raw, unpolished, yet unyielding. There was a fire beneath her calm, a spark that stirred something he had not felt in years. "You know the rules of this court," he said, stopping before her. "A thief, a rebel, a fugitive, the penalty is death. You broke laws that were set before you were even born. You knew this when you entered my lands." Lyra bowed her head slightly, the chains clinking as she moved. "I knew. I do not seek mercy." "Do you not?" Kale's voice softened almost imperceptibly, though his eyes remained sharp. "Or do you simply not believe it can be given?" For a moment, Lyra said nothing. She thought of the forests she had run through, the nights she had spent hiding beneath broken roofs and in hollowed trees. She thought of the whispers of prophecy she had long ignored, words that claimed she might one day change the fate of a kingdom. And she thought of the loneliness that had defined her life. She did not seek mercy, perhaps because she had never known it. Kale studied her in silence, as if reading the thoughts she did not speak aloud. The air between them was thick, heavy with unspoken words, with the tension of two beings bound by fate and circumstance. Finally, he spoke again, his voice low and deliberate. "Stand." Lyra obeyed, her wrists chafing from the chains. Her heart beat faster, not with hope, but with a strange anticipation. She did not yet understand what this moment would bring. Kale approached the raised dais where the throne sat, the crown on his head glinting with cold fire. Then unexpectedly he reached for the chains around her wrists. Lyra tensed, preparing herself for pain, but instead of tightening them or raising his hand in anger, he released her. "You will rise," he said, his gaze never leaving hers. Lyra hesitated. The words were simple, yet the tone carried power, authority, and a weight she had never felt before. Kale circled her once more, as if considering her worth. "The crown chooses not just a ruler," he said. "It chooses a soul capable of bearing its weight." And yet so many fail, consumed by fear or desire or doubt. Lyra met his eyes. "And if I fail, then you die," Kale replied, cold as stone. "But if you succeed," he paused, and the wind outside seemed to echo the silence of the chamber, "you will change this kingdom forever." The word struck Lyra like a blade. Change a kingdom. She had lived so long in shadows, dreaming only of survival, that the thought of shaping the fate of others was dizzying. And yet, beneath the fear, a pulse of something fierce and dangerous rose in her chest. Kale stopped in front of her and knelt slightly. The crown gleamed in his hand, a symbol of power and burden of life and death. He extended it toward her. Lyra's breath caught. She was not expecting this. What is this?" "The crown," Kale said simply. "I place it upon you not as punishment but as a choice. Kneel to it or wear it. Kneel to me or rise beside me." The chamber seemed to hold its breath. Every torch flickered as if moved by unseen hands. Lyra's heart thundered in her chest. She had come to the palace expecting death, not this. She had knelt to meet an end, and instead, a future she had never dared imagine was being offered. Her mind raced. Could she trust him? Could she survive this? Could she carry a weight greater than fear, stronger than the chains that had bound her wrists? Every instinct screamed to flee, yet every shred of courage she had whispered that she could not turn away. Finally, she lifted her hands. The chains fell entirely away now, and Kale placed the crown upon her head. It was heavier than she expected, not just in weight but in presence. She felt it settle onto her brow like a living thing, pressing against her temples, threading through her thoughts. Magic hummed softly in the air. The room darkened not with shadows but with awareness, as if the kingdom itself recognized its new bearer. Lyra staggered slightly under the crown's weight. She had not asked for this, and yet it felt inevitable. Kale watched her carefully. "The choice is made," he said. "Do not squander it." Lyra's hands touched the crown instinctively. Power hummed beneath her fingers, strange and electric. The chains were gone, but a new bond had formed, one that tied her to the Alpha King, to the throne, and to a destiny she barely understood. The court outside waited silently, their eyes upon her. Whispers rippled through the halls, half awe, half fear. The courtiers had seen the most daring thieves and the most cunning rebels, but none had ever knelt and risen to wear the crown with such reluctant strength. For the first time, Lyra felt the kingdom's gaze upon her, and she felt a spark of defiance. She had not survived this long to kneel and die quietly. She would rise, not just as a pawn, but as a force in her own right. Kale stepped back and regarded her, a faint smile flickering at the corner of his mouth. It was not kindness, nor was it cruelty. It was recognition, a silent acknowledgement that the Omega who had knelt before him might yet rise to stand as his equal. Outside, the storm raged, but within the palace, a new current had begun. The winds of Eldrath whispered of change, of a shadow lifting, and of a light, fragile, trembling, and dangerous, beginning to burn in the heart of the kingdom. Lyra's breath came in uneven gasps. She had faced death, and yet here she was, bound by crown and destiny to a king she barely knew, in a world she barely understood. Fear still lingered, yes, but beneath it burned something stronger: curiosity, defiance, and the faintest trace of hope. Kale's voice broke through her thoughts. "Do not forget," he said softly, "the crown chooses the one who can bear it, and the crown will test you in ways you cannot yet imagine." Lyra nodded, her fingers brushing the crown. "I will not fail," she whispered. Not for him, not for the kingdom, but for herself. And as the torches flickered, casting tall, wavering shadows on the stone walls, she realized that her life had changed in a single heartbeat. She had come to kneel, expecting death. Instead, she had risen, crowned, bound, and alive with a destiny she had never dared imagine. Outside, the storm continued its endless roar, and within the castle, two figures, one king, one Omega, stood facing a future that neither of them could yet see, but both would shape in ways that would echo through the kingdom for years to come. The crown was heavy, yes. But even heavier was the truth that Lyra now carried. She was no longer merely surviving. She was beginning to rule, and the kingdom of Eldrath would never be the same again. The morning after Lyra had been crowned, Eldrath Castle seemed both familiar and strange. Its walls, lined with ancient tapestries and cold stone, held a quiet tension, as if the castle itself had felt the shift of power. Courtiers moved through the halls with careful steps, their eyes flicking toward her with suspicion and curiosity. Whispers followed her like shadows, weaving through the corridors. She had expected fear, even hatred, but not the cautious awe that now accompanied every glance. Lyra moved slowly through the throne room, her hands brushing the hem of her simple cloak. The crown on her head felt heavier with each step. It was not just metal, it was a symbol, a burden, and a test all at once. She felt it pressing not only on her temples but on her very thoughts, as though it demanded attention, obedience, and understanding. She was learning that being crowned did not make one safe, it made one visible, exposed, and accountable to the weight of a kingdom. Kale watched her from the shadowed archway, his dark eyes following her movements. His presence was constant, a silent reminder of the authority he held and the bond now linking them both. He did not speak, but Lyra could feel his gaze in every cautious step she took. There was a strange comfort in it, and yet it also made her restless, aware that she was under scrutiny at all times. "You are thinking too much," Kale said finally, stepping into the room. His voice was calm, almost teasing, but it carried a sharp edge. "The crown is heavy, yes. But if you let doubt rule, it will crush you." Lyra looked up at him, her fingers tightening around the edge of the throne. "I do not know how to rule," she admitted quietly. "I have never wanted this. I only survived." Kale's expression softened slightly, though his eyes never left hers. Survival is not weakness. Many rulers never learn that lesson. You have survived longer than most. That tells me you have strength, strength they will never understand. She swallowed, feeling a flicker of pride mixed with fear. "And if I fail?" "Then you will learn," Kale said. "But you will not fail simply because you fear it. You will fail if you refuse to try. You must act, not wait." The lesson was harsh, yet strangely liberating. Lyra realized that the crown did not simply grant power, it demanded action. And action required courage, which she had spent a lifetime hiding beneath caution. As days passed, she began to meet the people of the court. Nobles, advisors, and servants all had their own expectations, their own fears, and their own ambitions. Some bowed politely, hiding resentment. Others whispered behind her back, questioning her worth and daring to wonder if Kale had made a mistake. Lyra learned to move carefully among them, to listen and observe. She discovered that the throne was more than a seat. It was a stage where every glance, every word, every gesture carried meaning. A smile could inspire loyalty, a frown could ignite rebellion. A simple choice, like acknowledging a servant's effort, could ripple across the kingdom. Kale remained close, offering guidance in subtle ways. He taught her to read the hidden currents of the court, the power of silence, the danger of revealing too much, the strength of patience. He did not coddle her, nor did he punish her mistakes with cruelty. Instead, he offered a quiet, steady presence, a mirror of the strength she was beginning to find within herself. Yet, beneath the guidance, a tension simmered. Lyra found herself aware of Kale in ways that startled her. His presence, so commanding and unwavering, ignited feelings she could not name. There were moments when their hands brushed while walking through the halls, or when their gazes met across the council table, and a strange warmth blossomed in her chest. She pushed the feeling aside, reminding herself that he was her king, her mentor, and nothing more. But Kale, too, seemed affected by the bond. He observed her with a careful intensity, noting every hesitation, every spark of defiance, every sign of understanding. It was not tenderness he felt, not yet, but a growing recognition that Lyra was unlike any Omega he had ever known. She challenged him in subtle ways, forcing him to consider mercy, patience, and the complexities of power he had long ignored. The court, however, was not idle. Rival nobles, sensing weakness in a young, untested ruler, began to conspire. One, Lord Edrin, had long coveted influence over the throne. He whispered to allies, planting seeds of doubt, and sought opportunities to undermine Lyra. His ambition was sharp and cunning, and he had no respect for a crown bearer who had not yet proven her authority. Lyra learned of his schemes through quiet intelligence, the servants' whispers, the cautious words of trusted advisors, and the subtle signs that something in the air had shifted. She felt the weight of the crown again, not as a symbol, but as a challenge. Every action, every word, every glance could be a misstep that Lord Edrin and his allies would exploit. Kale watched her navigate these dangers with quiet approval. "Do not let fear guide you," he advised. "Observe, learn, choose carefully." Lyra nodded, though her stomach twisted with anxiety. The crown was no longer just a piece of metal. It was responsibility, danger, and power all at once, and she felt it pressing against her in ways she could not fully comprehend. One evening, as the castle settled into quiet, Kale led her to the highest tower. From there, the kingdom stretched out in all directions, a dark sea of forests, rivers, and mountains. The wind whipped around them, cold and sharp, carrying the scent of snow and salt from the northern sea. "You must see the kingdom not as a subject, but as a ruler," Kale said, his voice low. "You must understand its fears, its desires, its needs. Only then can you protect it and yourself." Lyra nodded, shivering against the wind. She looked down at the villages below, the smoke rising from chimneys, the faint glow of torches in the darkness. For the first time, she saw not just survival, but the lives depending on her. "It is overwhelming," she admitted. "So much depends on every choice." "Yes," Kale said, "and that is why you must be strong. Not because of the crown, not because of me, but because you must live with yourself at the end of the day. Power is nothing if you cannot bear it." Their eyes met, and for a moment the world narrowed to the space between them. The wind rattled the tower, but it was the silence that carried weight. The shared understanding of responsibility, fear, and the fragile spark of connection neither dared name. Before Lyra could speak, a sharp cry echoed from the lower halls. They hurried down to see what had happened. A group of servants had discovered Lord Edrin attempting to enter the treasury, a dagger hidden beneath his cloak, his intentions clear. He had been testing the limits of the new crown-bearer's authority. Kale's eyes flared with anger, but Lyra stepped forward. "Stop him," she said firmly, her voice steady. "Do not harm him more than necessary." The guards hesitated, surprised by her command, but Kale nodded slightly, allowing them to obey her. The tension in the room was thick, as Edrin was seized and brought before them. "You dare test the crown?" Kale's voice was cold and sharp. Edrin sneered, but Lyra's gaze held him in place. "Power is not taken by force," she said quietly, yet every word carried authority. "It is earned through choice, through wisdom, and through courage. You have neither. Leave this place and consider yourself warned." The court was silent. Even Kale's eyes softened slightly, recognizing the strength in her words. For the first time, Lyra felt the weight of the crown not as a burden, but as a tool she could wield. As the intruder was removed, Lyra turned to Kale. I can do this," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Kale's expression was unreadable, yet there was a hint of something softer beneath the mask of the Alpha King. "Yes," he said, "but remember this, the crown will test you every day. Not just the court, not just your enemies, but yourself. Fear, doubt, hesitation, these are the true dangers." Lyra touched the crown lightly, feeling its strange hum beneath her fingers. It had chosen her, yes, but it also demanded her courage, her wisdom, and her heart. And though fear lingered, beneath it burned a growing strength, a spark that promised survival, resilience, and perhaps something more. That night she stood in the quiet of her chambers, the crown heavy upon her brow. She thought of the storm outside, of the kingdom she now served, and of the king who had given her both life and responsibility. She did not yet understand what the future held, but one truth was certain. She would rise, not merely as a pawn, but as a force to be reckoned with. And somewhere deep within her, a new thought emerged, quiet and unspoken. Perhaps this kingdom, this crown, and this king were all more intertwined with her destiny than she had ever imagined. But even as hope flickered, shadows lingered. Lord Edrin's ambition was not quenched. The court murmured, the kingdom watched, and in the night beyond the walls of the castle, dark forces stirred, forces that would test the Omega who had risen and the Alpha King who now stood beside her. Lyra tightened her grip on the crown, her heart steadying. She had survived storms before. She would survive this one too. The halls of Eldrath Castle were quiet in the early hours of dawn, but the silence was heavy, pregnant with secrets and whispers that had yet to be spoken aloud. Lyra stood at the edge of the library, a room so vast it seemed endless, its shelves filled with old tomes and scrolls that smelled of dust and magic. Her fingers traced the spines of the books, each one promising knowledge and danger. Ever since the events with Lord Edrin, the tension in the castle had only deepened. Lyra could feel eyes on her constantly, the weight of expectation pressing down as heavily as the crown on her brow. But she had begun to notice something strange about the castle itself. Its magic seemed restless. Shadows twisted unnaturally, and whispers seemed to echo along the walls, carrying words she could almost understand if she focused hard enough. Cale entered silently behind her, his presence filling the room before his voice ever did. "You have been quiet," he said, his tone more observation than accusation. "Or perhaps you are listening too closely." Lyra did not turn immediately. "I think the castle is speaking," she said softly, almost to herself. "Or it wants me to understand something. I don't know yet." Cale's eyes narrowed, though he did not speak. Instead, he walked to the nearest table and laid out a collection of ancient scrolls, their edges frayed, their ink faded. "Then you will need guidance," he said. "Not all knowledge is safe for an untested crown-bearer." Lyra's curiosity burned brighter than her fear. "I can handle it," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need to know who I am and why this crown chose me." Cale studied her, a mixture of caution and admiration in his gaze. "Very well," he said, settling into a chair. "But understand this, some truths can change you. Some truths will make you question the very kingdom you serve, and some may demand more than you think you can give." She knelt beside the table, spreading out the scrolls carefully. Each one contained fragments of Eldrath's history, wars, betrayals, and tales of rulers who had wielded the crown's magic. One story caught her attention more than the rest. It spoke of a bloodline, long thought extinct, whose members had the power to either strengthen the kingdom or unravel it entirely. The words felt like they were written for her. "The last of the line shall rise when the kingdom teeters between shadow and fire. Only the one who embraces both will endure." Lyra's heart pounded. Could it be true? Could she truly be the last of this forgotten line, destined to bear the weight of the crown in ways no one else could? She felt a mixture of awe and fear, realizing that her life in the shadows, running and hiding, had led her to this very moment. Cale leaned over, his gaze following hers. "That line is dangerous," he said quietly. "Powerful. Many who have inherited it could not control it. They were consumed by ambition, fear, or their own doubts. If you are of that bloodline, you must understand. It is not just the crown that will test you. It is yourself." Lyra met his eyes, feeling both challenge and connection in his gaze. "Then I must learn to control it," she said firmly. "I cannot let the kingdom or this crown fall into ruin." Cale nodded slowly. "Good, but learning will not be easy. You will need to face your own fears, your own doubts, and perhaps even your own shadows." Days turned into nights as Lyra studied the scrolls, practicing her newfound understanding of the crown's magic and the subtle ways it could influence the kingdom. She learned to sense the energy in the halls, to read the intentions behind words, to feel the currents of loyalty and deception that wove through the court. The crown did not grant power. It amplified what was already within her. And as she practiced, she felt herself growing stronger, braver, more capable. Cale remained nearby, offering guidance when she faltered, yet never imposing his own will. Their interactions grew quieter, deeper, filled with moments of shared understanding and unspoken tension. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken, but he never acted on it, never crossed the line. And yet, the closeness, the shared secrets, created a bond neither of them fully admitted aloud. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, Lyra discovered a hidden chamber beneath the castle, a room filled with old relics, glowing softly with an otherworldly light. The walls were carved with symbols she did not recognize, but which felt strangely familiar. At the center lay a small chest, bound with iron and etched with the same sigils. She knelt before it, her fingers trembling as she lifted the lid. Inside was a pendant, a simple silver chain holding a stone that seemed to pulse with warmth. As she held it, visions flickered through her mind. Forests in flames, rivers rising, voices calling her name. The magic was alive, ancient, and powerful. It felt connected to her, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Cale entered the chamber silently, his eyes immediately drawn to the pendant in her hand. "You have found it," he said softly, almost reverently. "It belonged to your ancestors. The magic, it has been waiting for you." Lyra looked at him, her heart racing. "Why did no one tell me?" "Because no one believed you would survive this long," Cale replied. "And because the magic chooses its master, it cannot be forced, only accepted." She felt the weight of the pendant settle against her chest, the pulse of its power sinking with her own heartbeat. Fear and exhilaration mingled inside her. She was beginning to understand that the crown and her bloodline were intertwined, that her destiny was larger than survival. It was responsibility, sacrifice, and perhaps even redemption. But knowledge brought danger. Word of her discovery reached the ears of Lord Edrin, who had not forgotten his humiliation. He conspired with others who were discontent with the new ruler, plotting to seize power, while Lyra was still learning to control her abilities. One night the castle was stirred by a disturbance. Lyra, sensing the unrest through the magic she had begun to understand, rushed to the throne room. There, she found Edrin attempting to break into the treasury once more, this time with several armed men. The sight of their boldness, their disregard for her authority, ignited a fire within her that she had not known existed. Cale was beside her in an instant, his presence steady, reassuring. "Do not let anger control you," he warned. Lyra nodded, though her pulse thundered. "I will not," she said, her voice strong. "But I will not allow this." With careful focus, she extended her hands toward the intruders, feeling the magic of the crown and the pendant flow through her. A shimmering light rose, casting long shadows across the chamber, and the men faltered, their resolve shaken. Edrin, however, remained defiant, sneering even as the magic surrounded him. "You cannot control me," he spat. Lyra's gaze hardened. "I am not controlling you," she said. "I am protecting what is mine to protect." The light intensified, and the intruders stumbled back, unable to move forward. The power was not born of cruelty or vengeance, but of will, courage, and a sense of justice that had been dormant in her all her life. Cale stepped forward, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "Enough," he said, and the magic subsided, leaving the intruders disarmed and awed. Edrin was forced to kneel, defeated not by violence, but by authority, presence, and control that he had underestimated. The court would speak of this night for years, but for Lyra it was a revelation. She had begun to understand the depth of her power, not just as a crown bearer, but as someone capable of shaping the kingdom, influencing its fate, and protecting it from the darkness within and beyond its walls. As the intruders were removed and the castle returned to quiet, Cale and Lyra stood alone in the throne room. The candles flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across their faces. For a moment they simply regarded each other, sharing a silence filled with unspoken thoughts, questions, and feelings. "You are growing stronger," Cale said finally, his voice soft, almost a whisper. Lyra touched the crown lightly. "I am learning," she replied. "But I am still afraid." "And that is why you will endure," Kale said. "Strength is not the absence of fear, it is what you do with it." The night stretched on, quiet except for the soft hiss of the wind outside. Yet even in that quiet, Lyra felt the pulse of danger, the stirrings of rivals, and the whisper of a destiny she had only begun to understand. She was no longer merely surviving. She was learning, growing, and beginning to wield the power that had waited for her for generations. And as she looked at Kale, standing beside her, she realized that their fates were bound not only by the crown, but by something deeper: trust, respect, and the beginnings of a bond neither had fully admitted, but which would shape the future of Eldrath. Beyond the castle walls, in the shadows of the northern forests, forces long thought dormant began to stir. The kingdom was not yet safe, and the Omega who had risen would be tested in ways she could not yet imagine. But for the first time, she felt ready. Lyra touched the pendant at her chest, feeling the warmth of her ancestors' magic flow through her. The crown was heavy, yes, but her will was heavier. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a protector, a ruler, and perhaps a spark of hope for Eldrath. The night deepened, shadows moving in rhythm with her heartbeat, as a new chapter of her life began, one filled with power, responsibility, danger, and a connection to the Alpha King that neither dared name but both felt with every pulse of their hearts. The castle of Eldrath trembled under the weight of a storm, both in the sky and within its walls. Thunder rolled over the mountains and lightning split the night, illuminating the spires in brief flashes of silver. Yet the true storm was not outside. It was in the halls, where power, ambition, and destiny collided. Lyra stood at the heart of the throne room, the crown heavy upon her brow, the pendant warm against her chest. Her breath came steady, her fingers brushing the carved arms of the throne. This was not the moment for hesitation. Lord Edrin had returned, bolder and more dangerous than ever, with followers who sought to seize the throne while she and Kale faced the trials of power and magic. Kale appeared beside her, the Alpha King's presence both commanding and protective. His dark eyes scanned the chamber, assessing every shadow, every potential threat. "Stay close to me," he said, his voice low but firm. "They will test you tonight. More than your skill, they will test your heart." Lyra nodded. Fear tightened around her chest, but she let it settle, shaping it into determination. The crown, the pendant, and her bloodline pulsed together, a rhythm of power and control she had been learning to harness. Tonight, all her lessons, all her training would be put to the ultimate test. The doors of the throne room crashed open. Torches flared, casting long, jagged shadows across the stone walls. Lord Edrin entered, flanked by armed men and a few disloyal nobles who had sworn allegiance to his ambition. His eyes glittered with arrogance, but Lyra met his gaze unflinchingly. "You dare challenge me again?" she asked, her voice calm, carrying authority that resonated with the crown's power. Edrin sneered. "You are weak. A crown does not make a ruler, and you are nothing without your king to guide you." Kale's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. He trusted her to act, to show strength that he had seen growing within her over the past weeks. Lyra lifted her hand slightly, feeling the magic flow from the pendant, through the crown, and into herself. The air shimmered as if the castle itself recognized her right to stand, her right to defend the throne. "I am not nothing," she said firmly. "I am the crown bearer, and I will protect this kingdom." The men moved toward her, but a wave of light pulsed outward from Lyra, stopping them in their tracks. It was not violent, but firm, a declaration of power and control. She felt the magic of her ancestors guiding her hands, steadying her mind and focusing her will. Edrin's expression faltered, though he quickly masked it with defiance. "Tricks and light cannot stop me," he shouted. "The crown cannot protect you from ambition." Lyra's gaze sharpened. "Ambition without purpose destroys itself. I stand not for myself, but for the people of Eldrath, and for that I am stronger than you." The battle that followed was not of swords alone, magic and will intertwined. Lyra sent pulses of energy that disarmed her enemies, disrupted their movements, and illuminated the truth of her command. Kale fought alongside her, a steady force, guarding her from threats she could not yet anticipate, but never overpowering her. She realized that his guidance had not been about control, it had been about teaching her to trust herself. As the struggle reached its peak, Lyra focused on Edrin. He had moved closer, attempting to strike at the crown's magic. But the pendant around her neck glowed fiercely, responding to her determination. A wall of shimmering light rose, protecting the throne room and separating her from her adversary. Edrin's anger and frustration boiled over. "This cannot be," he shouted. "A child cannot wield such power." Lyra's eyes blazed. "I am not a child. I am the last of a line that has waited for centuries. I am the one who will endure when others fail. You will not take this kingdom from me." With a final pulse of energy, the intruders were pushed back, disarmed and defeated, not through cruelty, but through the authority and power Lyra had grown into. Edrin fell to his knees, his ambition crushed not by physical might alone, but by the strength, courage, and wisdom of a crown-bearer who had embraced her destiny. The silence that followed was thick, almost reverent. The storm outside seemed to echo the calm that had settled within the castle walls. Kale stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You did not just survive," he said softly. "You led, you protected, you became what the crown intended you to be." Lyra felt a swell of emotion, relief, pride, and something deeper, something she could not name. "I could not have done it without you," she admitted, though her voice carried neither dependence nor weakness. "You taught me to trust myself." Kale's gaze softened, the sternness of the Alpha King giving way to something more vulnerable, more human. "You were always capable," he said quietly. "I only guided you to see it." For a long moment, they simply stood together, bound by the crown, by the trials they had faced, and by a connection that neither had fully named but which both felt in the quiet rhythm of their hearts. The court slowly gathered, eyes wide with awe and newfound respect. Whispers filled the halls, not of fear but of admiration, of hope. The kingdom had witnessed the rise of a leader, one who was strong, wise, and just. Lyra realized that her journey was far from over, but she had proven herself capable of meeting challenges head-on, and of standing tall against both ambition and darkness. Kale stepped forward, raising his hand to address the court. "This kingdom has seen many rulers," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority, yet tempered with pride. "Few have faced their trials with courage and wisdom. Lyra, the Omega who rose to wear the crown, has proven that true strength is not given, it is earned. And earned it she has." The court erupted into murmurs of approval, bows, and respectful nods. Lyra felt the crown settle more comfortably upon her head, not as a burden, but as a symbol of her growth, her courage, and the responsibility she had embraced. Later, when the castle had quieted once more, Lyra and Kale walked along the balcony overlooking the kingdom. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed in silver moonlight and the distant glow of fires and torches. "You changed tonight," Kale said, his voice gentle, almost reflective. Lyra looked at him, the crown gleaming softly in the moonlight. "No," she said softly. "I only became what I was meant to be. The crown, it chose me, but it also taught me. I had to learn, and I had to trust myself." Kale nodded, his gaze lingering on her. "And you will continue to learn. The crown will always test you, as will the kingdom. But you have something many rulers do not: courage, wisdom, and heart. You are no longer the Omega who knelt before me. You are something far stronger." Lyra felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet certainty she had never known. She had faced death, threats, and the shadows of the past. She had discovered the power within herself, the strength of her bloodline, and the bond that tied her to the Alpha King. She realized that their connection was not just about guidance or duty. It was about trust, respect, and a partnership forged in trials and shadows. Kale reached out, placing a steady hand over hers, the warmth of his presence grounding her. "We face the future together," he said simply. "Not as master and servant, not as king and subject, but as equals. And together we will protect Eldrath." Lyra nodded, feeling the truth of his words resonate deep within her. The storm had passed, but the trials of leadership and destiny were only beginning. And yet, for the first time, she did not feel fear. She felt purpose, strength, and a sense of belonging she had never known before. Beyond the castle walls, the world was vast, filled with challenges, mysteries, and shadows yet to be faced. But Lyra and Kale, bound by the crown, their trust, and the experiences that had shaped them, were ready. They had survived, learned, and grown, and together they would face whatever the kingdom and fate might bring. Lyra touched the crown lightly, feeling its pulse, its magic, and the bond it had forged. She was no longer a pawn. She was a ruler, a protector, and a bearer of hope. The Omega who had knelt before the Alpha King had risen, stronger and wiser than anyone could have imagined. The night was calm now, the stars reflecting in the distant rivers, and the kingdom of Eldrath slept safely under the guardianship of its new ruler. Yet even in the quiet, Lyra knew the crown's true challenge was eternal. Power and responsibility were never final. They were living things, to be nurtured, protected, and wielded with wisdom. And with Kale beside her, she was ready to embrace that future, to rule not with fear but with courage, understanding, and heart. The crown had chosen her, but in the end, it was her choice to rise.